Let's go in the details of the system. For the book class, we have name, ID, and quantity. We are assigning them, but I also have here a total borrowed initially with 0 to differentiate between the total quantity that we have and the total borrowed so far. And the borrow function is a Boolean function. It's going to return true or false if we manage to borrow. Remember, to borrow something, you must have more quantities to borrow. So I'm mainly checking the difference between total quantity and total borrowed. If it's 0, then we don't have any more available books, so I'm returning false. Otherwise, I'm just incrementing the total borrowed books and returning true. To return a copy, I'm mainly making sure that there are really something that was borrowed. This is just an internal condition, and I am here decrementing the total borrowed books. The representation function is a function that just helping me to print this book in a nice way. In the user class, we have again name and ID elements here, but I also have the borrowed books function. Then we have a bunch of functionality. The borrow function is going to add the book in my books list. That's all. The isBorrowed function would like to check if a book inside my borrowed books or not. You can do that by iterating over all of the books, checking, comparing ID by ID, returning true if it found, otherwise false. If this guy is really borrowed, it should occur in one of these if condition. Note that one might write something like return a book in self.borrowed books. Okay, this is going to actually work, but this is wrong. Why? Because it's going to compare memory addresses. In the future, we will learn how to make this function more correct. The returning book is again iterating on the list and finding a book that I borrowed and then just delete it from here. And we have two representations. One of them is printing the user name and ID, and a detailed parameter to print the function as a detailed with the borrowed books. And the representation function is actually calling this function but telling it that I need it to be detailed. So far, these are the two core components that we have in our system. So let's move to the maybe the front end first. The front end has all of the choices, and I have here a dummy data. Forget about it for a while, and also let's forget about the while true from here. Let's move to the different functionality. Something like add a book is going to read from the user the name, ID, total quantity, and we will call the back end to add this book. Printing the books is going to delegate the call to the print name prefix. I'm not sure if I talked about the word delegate or not, but it is very important word in software engineering. The word delegate means you are assigning the responsibility to someone else. In terms of code here, I would like to print the books, but we have a functionality that take a prefix to print all of the books starting with a specific prefix. Thinking about it, printing books is as same as printing the prefix when the prefix is empty, right? So I used here a flag to decide if we are going to read some prefix from the user or not. And I'm assigning here the just print to all. So if we will print to all, do not read the prefix from the user. Otherwise, we will get the list of the books from the back end that has this prefix. And then with a list comprehension and join statement, we will prepare the string of all of the available books. In a similar way, we have add user functionality that is calling the backend to add the user. And I have here a functionality that is a helper functionality. This function is going to ask the user to enter valid username and book name up to 3 times. So we have a loop here up to 3 times, every time asking the user to print to get username and book name. In every iteration, we ask the user for a username. There is a function in the back end to get the username by given name. If the function returned none, we know that this is invalid name. So we tell, hey, this is invalid username. In a similar way, we have a function to get the book name. If it is none, we know that this is invalid book name. In this case, we again say this is invalid book name. If both cases are valid, then we have now valid username and book name. If all of the trials are done, we tell him that you did several trials, that's all, try later, and return none and none. So this is a simple utility is going to help us during our code. Let's see what's going to happen here. The borrow book functionality is going to read first the valid username and book name. If if they are invalid in up to 3 trials, it's just going to return. Otherwise, we will tell the backend to borrow the book of username and book name. The returning book has a very similar logic, reading them and asking the backend to return them. Finally, the borrowed books here. The borrowed book is mainly reading the book name and checking if it is invalid or not. If it is invalid, we will stop. Otherwise, we will get all the books borrowed for using this book name. So we get a user list for that. If the user list is empty, we say that no one borrowed this book. Otherwise, we print the users that borrowed this book using a simple representation. And printing user is very similar logic. We get the backend users, all of them, convert them to string and print them. I would like you to notice the following. Let's say that you ended one day working as a front-end engineer. You need to think this way. You need to think what I'm going to present to the user and what do I need exactly from the backend. And I don't care how the backend implemented that. In the front end, you are the guy responsible for what to print to the users, what to read from the user, what to call to the backend. And from a technology to another, you learn different ways to make the call to the backend. And this will vary from web to the development and business from a framework to another. I am here during this course establishing this idea of front end and back end and making the calls. So as you notice, when I was describing that, I didn't jump into the back end functionality so far. I'm just showing you how as a user I'm thinking as a front end developer. I am reading name and ID, and then I'm calling the back end to add them to his own data or his own database. So this is mainly the front end part. Let's jump into the back end part. The back end should have at least this corresponding functionality to what the user requested for us. For example, function like add a book is going simply to create an object of the book and adding it to the internal books list. In a very similar way, the add user is going to just read and add to the list. Let's say we need to implement something that gets a books list given a prefix. We can do that by simple comprehension. Iterate over all of the all of the books. If the book starts with this prefix, return it. If we would like to get the user by name, we're going to iterate over all of the names. If the name match, return it, otherwise none. And the get book by name is a very similar handy functionality. To borrow a book, we take the username and get the book from the book name, make sure they aren't invalid. After that, we would like to borrow a book, but notice that this function is boolean to indicate if we are succeeded or not. If book.borrow worked well, we also borrow for the book, like borrow the book for the user and return true. Otherwise, we return false. Comparing to this functionality, we need here to make sure first that the user borrowed this book. Like, don't ask me to return a book for someone that I didn't borrow this book, so I'm not going to return it. So first, make sure the book is borrowed already. If it is borrowed, return the book copy and return the book from the user. So we're going here to make the incrementing, and we're going here to return the book itself. And finally, the get users borrowed a book, we take a book name, and again we make a simple list comprehension to iterate over the users, check who borrowed this book and return it. Maybe the last functionality here would be, I think I already mentioned them. Yeah, the return book here, as I said, we just iterate over all of the books and compare and remove the book that we already borrowed. I hope you now got the big picture. This is like I think overall, yeah, like a 300 almost lines of code, but they are like basic. There are here an extra basic functionality. I hope it wasn't so heavy for you. I would like you to know that project building skills is a hard skill. It's going to take time, so take your time. Feel free to give a trial with the project, keep going, come back later, and so on.